The hum of the engines reverberated through Captain David Carter's bones as his squad's dropship plummeted through the darkened atmosphere of the unknown planet. The air was thick with the smell of burnt fuel and sweat, the latter only intensifying as the countdown clock blinked on the comms display. 5 minutes, came the voice of Sergeant Cole. Stay sharp, people. This is a recon mission. We get in, we get out. David didn't need Cole to remind him. He had seen too many recon missions turn into bloodbaths, and his instincts were already tingling with the sense that this one was different. He gripped the edge of his seat tighter as the dropship lurched to one side, avoiding what seemed like debris falling from the heavens. The planet's atmosphere was still unstable, and the gravity was heavier than Earth's, making every movement feel more cumbersome, more weighted. Visual contact, Private Amelia Torres, the ship's gunner, reported. Her voice was tense, though she had been calm throughout their descent. Massive ship wreckage just ahead. Looks like a battlefield. David nodded, his fingers brushing the rifle on his lap. Everyone ready? He asked, though he knew the answer already. Each member of his squad had trained for years to survive in hostile environments. But what they were about to face, none of them could have prepared for. The dropship hit the ground with a heavy thud. The door slammed open almost immediately, and the soldiers flooded out in perfect formation, rifles raised, eyes scanning the barren landscape. Dust swirled around them, blocking their vision for a brief moment. The sound of alien machinery was faint in the distance, like a low hum that seemed to penetrate deep into their skulls. There was something off about this place. Something that made the hair on the back of David's neck stand on end. Stay alert, David ordered, his voice sharp. We don't know what's out here. The squad moved in silence, boots crunching against the rocky soil, the faint hum of alien tech growing louder as they neared the wreckage. The ship looked like nothing David had ever seen before, huge, with sleek metal surfaces that gleamed in the dim light of the distant sun. It had clearly been struck in some sort of battle. The massive hole in the side of the craft appeared fresh, but the wreckage around it looked like it had been there for years. David squinted into the distance. Move up, he ordered. The squad advanced cautiously, the tension palpable in the air. As they neared the ship, David's eyes caught something strange, a shimmer in the atmosphere, like a rippling wave distorting the air. He motioned for the squad to stop. His hand instinctively went to his helmet's comm system. Cole, Torres, get a closer look at that energy signature, he said. Something's off. Roger that, Cole responded. David turned to his left, where Sergeant Cole and Private Torres began to advance toward the energy field. Weapons ready but scanning the area with every step. The rest of the squad fanned out, weapons at the ready, eyes darting from one side to the other. David's instincts were right. Something about this place felt wrong. There was no sign of life anywhere, but there was an unsettling sense of being watched, as though the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It was then that they heard the first sound, the grinding screech of metal on metal, coming from the depths of the wreckage. David's heart skipped a beat. Everyone, weapons hot, he shouted. His squad moved into position immediately, their boots crunching the dry ground like thunder in the quiet of the alien landscape. Suddenly, a shape shot out from the wreckage, moving so quickly that David barely had time to react. A flicker of movement, and something slammed into Sergeant Cole with a sickening thud. The sergeant's body was thrown across the ground like a ragdoll, his armor cracking under the impact. Ambush! David yelled, instinctively drawing his weapon. His rifle came up in an instant, but before he could fire, the air around them seemed to ripple again. The shimmer intensified, distorting everything in its wake. A voice, low, resonant, alien, boomed out of nowhere. You should not be here. David's blood ran cold. He had heard stories of alien species that communicated through telepathy or other means, but this was different. It wasn't in his mind. It was as if the words were coming from the very air around them. And worse, it felt menacing. "Fall back," David ordered. The squad was already moving, retreating toward the ship, trying to regroup. But the air around them continued to ripple, and the energy seemed to pulse, sending tremors through the ground. Suddenly, a massive shadow fell over them. Something enormous, a ship, no, a creature, was descending from the sky. It hovered above them, silent and imposing. It was nothing like anything David had ever seen before. Its dark, sleek surface seemed to swallow the light around it, and its shape shifted unnaturally, like it was made from liquid metal. "Get down!" David barked, as the squad dove for cover behind the wreckage of the fallen ship. The creature, or whatever it was, paused mid-air, almost as if it was analyzing them. Then, with a sudden, terrifying flash of light, it shot forward, moving faster than the human eye could track. David barely had time to raise his rifle before the creature was upon them. A pulse of energy shot from its body, striking the ground where his squad had been just moments before. The impact was deafening, the ground shaking beneath them. "Everyone down. Take cover," David shouted, pushing Private Torres to the ground as another blast of energy passed overhead. The squad scrambled for cover, ducking behind rocks and ship debris as the creature hovered above them, waiting for its next move. David's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the area for any sign of survival. Cole was down, his body unmoving, but Torres and the rest of the squad had made it to cover. David's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. This was no ordinary alien force. This was something else entirely. Then, as if answering his thoughts, the creature made a sound, a low hum, and in that instant, the sky above them seemed to split open. A massive ship materialized from nowhere, its immense size dwarfing the wreckage around them. The creature's voice echoed again, but this time, it was more distinct. "The war is already lost. Surrender, or face annihilation." David's mind was reeling. Annihilation? They were just a recon squad. They hadn't come to fight. But now, it was clear. This wasn't a simple scouting mission. They were standing on the precipice of something far larger, something that would change the fate of humanity forever. "Captain, what do we do?" Torres shouted, her voice filled with panic. David's mind was racing. The energy that had shimmered in the atmosphere, it wasn't a weapon. It was something else. Something ancient. Something powerful. "Hold your fire," David barked. "I think we're dealing with something far beyond us." The creature's voice boomed again. "This is your only warning. Leave now, or we will exterminate your kind." David glanced back at his team. They were too far from their ship to retreat. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this force was, it was connected to something much bigger. They couldn't leave without answers. "I'm not leaving," David said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Not until we know what they want." And with that, the true fight for humanity's survival began. David Carter stood frozen, staring at the looming alien ship as it hovered above the wreckage. The creature that had spoken was gone, but its words echoed in his mind like a haunting melody. Surrender, or face annihilation. It wasn't a request. It was a promise. The rest of the squad was huddled behind the wreckage of the broken ship, weapons still aimed at the sky, though no enemy had yet shown itself. The tremors of the pulse that had struck the ground earlier still reverberated beneath their feet, a constant reminder of the destructive power that had just been unleashed. "Captain," Sergeant Cole's voice was rough, almost a growl. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, though he'd managed to get back on his feet. "What the hell is going on? Those things, those creatures." David didn't answer right away. His mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of information. This wasn't just another alien encounter. No, this was something far more dangerous. Something ancient. And worse, something connected to humanity's fate. "Everyone, fall back to the ship," David ordered. He could sense the fear in their eyes, the hesitation in their movements, but there was no other choice. They needed to get to safety, and they needed to find answers. The squad moved quickly, with David leading the way. The dropship was still parked a few hundred meters away, but with every step they took toward it, the unsettling hum of the alien ship loomed louder, more invasive. It was as though the very air around them was filled with its presence, like a predator watching its prey. "Move, move!" David snapped, pushing Private Torres forward when she hesitated. "We don't have much time." As they neared the dropship, the communication panel buzzed to life. The ship's AI, a neutral voice that had guided them through countless missions, crackled in their helmets. "Captain Carter, we have detected a massive energy anomaly in the surrounding area. It appears to be coming from an unknown source," the AI reported in a monotone voice. David's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of anomaly?" "Unknown," the AI replied. "It doesn't match any known energy signatures from previous encounters. It seems to be self-contained, but expanding." "Great," David muttered, casting a glance at his squad. "Just what we need." As the team climbed into the dropship, David's mind was already on overdrive. They had to get to a safe distance, regroup, and assess their next move. But the weight of the alien ship above them kept him rooted to the spot. It had to be a part of something bigger. Something that had been waiting for humanity, maybe even manipulating the course of their history. The dropship's engines roared to life, and they ascended, leaving the wreckage behind. The ship rose steadily, but David could still feel the pull of the alien presence. It wasn't just a physical ship that hovered in the sky. It was something else, something alive. "Captain, where are we headed?" Cole asked, his voice heavy with suspicion. "We can't just run from this. We need answers." David looked out the window as the planet grew smaller beneath them. "We need to get to the nearest facility. There's a hidden military outpost on this planet that might have some intel. If we're lucky, we'll find something that can explain all of this." "Intel?" Cole scoffed, his voice rising in frustration. "Do you really think there's any intel that can explain this?" He waved his hand toward the darkened sky, toward the alien ship that continued to hover ominously. "What the hell are we up against, Captain? This isn't just some alien invasion. It's something else. Something we haven't even begun to understand." David didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. He didn't have an answer. He had been in situations like this before, outmatched, outgunned, outsmarted, but there had always been something, some scrap of knowledge or technology that could turn the tide. This felt different. It felt like they were walking into a trap, and worse, like they had already been marked as prey. The dropship's engines hummed steadily as they cruised toward the facility. The planet's surface was dotted with scattered outposts, many of which had been abandoned after the initial wave of alien attacks. The military had retreated, consolidating their forces on Earth, but David knew there was still hope. Some of the older bases had stored valuable research from previous encounters, research that could unlock the secrets of the alien species and their technology. As they descended toward the outpost, David's mind wandered back to the energy signature that the AI had detected. Self-contained. Expanding. What the hell did that mean? And more importantly, what was its connection to the aliens they had encountered? Could it be linked to the mysterious power they had felt in the atmosphere earlier? The dropship landed with a soft thud, the metallic doors sliding open. The team disembarked swiftly, moving into the facility. Inside, it was quiet, eerily quiet. The facility had been abandoned for years, but the signs of a hurried evacuation were everywhere. Tables overturned, computers smashed, walls covered in strange markings that none of them could decipher. David walked cautiously down the hallway, the sound of his boots echoing in the silence. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. They passed a series of rooms, each one filled with files, weapons, and equipment long since rendered obsolete. But as they approached the central control room, something caught David's eye, a small, sealed compartment in the corner of the hallway. The door was marked with a symbol he recognized from the ancient texts, something he had seen only once before in classified military archives. "Wait," David said, holding up a hand. He motioned toward the compartment. "I need to see that." The squad followed him as he approached the door. It was locked, but David didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, an old keycard, one that had been left behind by the previous occupants. With a quick swipe, the lock clicked open. Inside the compartment was a small, metallic box. It hummed faintly, the same eerie hum that had filled the air back on the planet's surface. David opened it carefully, revealing a series of data drives. But it was the object sitting atop the drives that made his heart race. It was a crystal, roughly the size of a fist, but its surface shimmered with an internal light, like it was alive. A low-frequency buzz emanated from it, much like the energy pulse they had encountered earlier. "What the hell is this?" Cole asked, his voice barely a whisper. David didn't answer. He carefully reached for the crystal, lifting it from the box. As his fingers touched the surface, a jolt of energy shot through him, sharp, cold, like ice in his veins. The vision that followed was immediate, intense, and overwhelming. For a split second, he saw a massive city, towering structures stretching into the sky, far more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vision shifted to a battlefield, alien ships clashing with human forces. The humans were losing. But then, out of nowhere, the mysterious energy force David had felt earlier surged, disrupting the alien ship's technology. The tide of battle shifted. Then the vision faded, leaving David gasping for breath. "What the hell just happened?" Private Torres asked, her voice shaking. "What was that?" David stared at the crystal, his mind reeling. "I don't know. But I think this is the key. This is what we need." Cole frowned. "What's it supposed to do?" David didn't know the answer to that, either. But whatever this crystal was, it was far more important than they had realized. And somehow, it was tied to the war between the alien factions, and to the survival of humanity. Before he could say another word, the AI's voice crackled in his ear. "Captain Carter, we've detected a large energy surge in the vicinity. It's growing. Fast." David's eyes narrowed. "We're not alone." Suddenly, the lights flickered out. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed from somewhere deep within the facility. Then, as if on cue, the doors to the control room slammed shut, trapping them inside. The battle for humanity had only just begun. The control room's heavy doors slammed shut behind them with a finality that felt like the closing of a tomb. The sound echoed through the abandoned facility, leaving the squad in oppressive silence. The only light came from the flickering overhead bulbs and the glow of the strange crystal David had retrieved. The crystal hummed quietly in David's hands, its pale blue light casting eerie shadows across his face. He had no idea what it was, or how it had activated such a vivid vision, but he was certain of one thing: whatever it was key to the alien conflict that was rapidly consuming their world. "Captain," Sergeant Cole's voice broke the silence, low and tense. "What the hell are we doing? We're not even sure what we're dealing with. Hell, we don't even know if this thing is," he nodded toward the crystal, "safe." David looked up at him. Cole had always been pragmatic, a veteran of too many missions to count, but there was a sharp edge to his words now, one David had never heard before. It wasn't just fear, it was doubt. And doubt, in a squad like this, could kill them all. "I know," David said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. "But if we don't understand what this is, if we don't figure out what we're up against, we're all dead anyway." They were standing in what appeared to be a command center, judging by the rows of dormant computers and weapons lockers. The monitors, long since powered down, were covered in a layer of dust, and the air was thick with the smell of aged metal and stale air. Yet, despite the eerie stillness, there was an undeniable sense of urgency in the air. Something was coming, and they needed to prepare. Private Torres shifted uneasily beside him. "So, what do we do with this thing?" she asked, her voice tight. "It's glowing. And buzzing. That's not normal." David nodded, still holding the crystal. The strange sensation it had triggered in his mind still lingered, like a static charge. He could feel the pulse of energy, faint but constant, as if the crystal was waiting for something, waiting for them to make the next move. "We study it," David said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew how reckless it sounded. "We need to know what it is before we do anything else. Maybe the facility has the tools to analyze it." The squad moved cautiously through the control room. They rifled through old, dusty data pads and weapons lockers, trying to locate anything that might be useful. But nothing seemed to work. It was as if the entire facility had been abandoned overnight, with only remnants of its former life left behind. The equipment was outdated, far from the advanced technologies David had seen in military deployments on Earth. Yet, despite the lack of resources, the crystal remained the focus of their attention. David couldn't help but feel that it held the answers to everything: the war, the mysterious alien forces, and perhaps even the survival of humanity itself. "Captain," Sergeant Cole said, his voice low. "What if this is part of the reason the aliens came here in the first place? I've heard stories about alien artifacts, ancient ones, that can change the course of battles, maybe even entire civilizations. What if this crystal is one of those things?" David turned to look at him, eyes narrowing. "And if it is? What do we do then?" Cole shook his head. "We don't know what we're dealing with. If this crystal is connected to the aliens in some way, we need to be careful. If it's something they want, something that could give us an advantage, that makes us a target." David's stomach churned. He had thought of that, too. But what other option did they have? They were stranded on an alien planet, surrounded by an unknown force, with no way to contact Earth or request backup. Their only chance of survival, it seemed, was to uncover whatever secrets this crystal held. Just then, a sharp, mechanical noise broke through the silence. The room's lights flickered once again, and the hum of alien energy seemed to grow louder. The crystal in David's hand pulsed, almost as if it were responding to the environment. He glanced down at it, his fingers tightening around the object as he braced for whatever was coming next. "Everyone, get ready," David ordered, his voice low but urgent. "Something's happening." The squad instinctively fell into formation, their weapons raised, eyes scanning every corner of the control room. The hum of alien energy increased in pitch, vibrating the walls and rattling the floor beneath their feet. Then, suddenly, the ground trembled violently, throwing them off balance. "Take cover!" David shouted, diving behind a nearby desk as the entire building seemed to shake. The squad followed suit, huddling behind whatever cover they could find. The tremors grew stronger, and the air seemed to pulse with the same strange energy they had encountered outside. Through the vibrating walls, David could hear something, a deep, resonant sound, like a roar, echoing through the facility. It was coming closer, growing louder with every passing second. The aliens were here. But this time, it wasn't just a few scouts. It was a full-scale attack. "Captain!" Torres called out from behind her cover. "We need to get out of here. Now!" David's mind raced. They couldn't afford to run. The only chance they had was to hold their ground, to find out what the hell was happening and why the aliens had come for them. He turned to the squad, locking eyes with each of them. "We stand our ground," he said. "We're not leaving until we figure this out. If we run now, we're as good as dead." The squad nodded, a grim determination settling over them. They had no choice. They were too far in now. They had to see this through. The roaring sound grew louder still, and then, suddenly, the doors to the control room burst open. Alien soldiers, tall, skeletal figures with dark, gleaming exoskeletons, charged in, their weapons raised. They moved with terrifying speed, like shadows in the dim light, but their presence was unmistakable. David's rifle was up in an instant. He fired, his shots landing on one of the alien soldiers, but the creature only staggered slightly, the blast having little effect on its thick armor. "Focus fire!" David shouted. Torres, Cole, suppress the front. The squad opened fire, their weapons rattling as they aimed at the aliens' weak points. But the soldiers seemed almost impervious to their attacks. The room was filled with a chaotic flurry of gunfire, each shot echoing off the walls as the aliens pressed forward. Despite their relentless fire, the creatures barely flinched. They were unlike anything the squad had ever encountered before, too fast, too resilient. David's mind raced, searching for any advantage. That's when he remembered the crystal. He glanced at the glowing object in his hand, which was still pulsing with strange energy. The hum was growing louder. David had no idea if the crystal could help, but it was their only shot. He quickly activated a nearby console, bringing up a display of the alien forces in the facility. His fingers hovered over the controls, heart pounding as he searched for any possible way to use the crystal's energy. Suddenly, the room shook again, even more violently than before. The air crackled with energy, and David felt a surge of power emanate from the crystal. Without thinking, he slammed the crystal onto the console. The impact triggered an immediate response. The crystal flared to life, its blue light suddenly blinding as it pulsed with an immense force. The entire room seemed to vibrate with energy, the walls shaking violently as the alien soldiers reeled back in shock. Then, a low, echoing hum filled the room, different from the sound of the crystal, deeper, more resonant. David could feel the ground beneath him shifting, as if the entire facility itself was awakening. "What's happening?" Cole shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar. David could barely hear him over the sound of the crystal's power, but as he looked up, he realized something terrifying. The aliens were retreating. They weren't running from the humans. They were retreating from the crystal. It was like the very presence of the object repelled them, as if it were a force field of some kind. The creatures backed off, slowly at first, then faster as the crystal's light grew brighter and more intense. They reached the door, paused for a moment, and then disappeared into the shadows of the facility. David stood there, breathless. He had no idea what just happened, but they were alive. For now. Did we just win? Torres asked, her voice trembling. David didn't answer. He was still staring at the spot where the aliens had disappeared. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. One thing was clear, the crystal was powerful. And it had just saved their lives. But why? And what had the aliens wanted with it? "Stay sharp," David finally said, his voice low. "We need answers. And we need them fast." The squad nodded, their weapons still drawn, eyes scanning the shadows of the control room. But for the first time since they had landed on this alien world, David felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were beginning to understand the forces that had been unleashed. And whatever happened next, they were going to need every bit of that power to survive. David Carter stood in the heart of the abandoned facility, watching the last traces of the alien soldiers disappear into the shadows. His squad was catching their breath, weapons still aimed at every doorway, every corridor, every angle where an enemy might emerge. The crystal in his hand pulsed softly, its faint blue glow providing the only source of light in the dim control room. David had no idea how or why the crystal had repelled the aliens, but the fact remained, it had saved their lives. At least for now. "Captain," Sergeant Cole called, his voice breaking through the tense silence. "What the hell just happened?" "Those creatures, they backed off. But we need to get out of here, those things won't stop hunting us." David's gaze remained fixed on the door through which the aliens had fled. He was lost in thought. Something about the crystal, its energy, its power, had triggered a chain of events that none of them could explain. And yet, it had worked. For now, that was all that mattered. "We can't leave," David said, turning toward the squad. "Not yet. We need to understand what this crystal is, what it's doing. We're not getting out of here until we figure that out. And we're not going to be safe until we do." "Safe?" Private Torres echoed, disbelief in her voice. "We're not safe now. Those things," she gestured toward the door where the aliens had disappeared. "They're not just going to forget about us." David shook his head. "I know. But we have a small window here. We know that the crystal affects them, and that it has some kind of power we can use. That's what we need to investigate." A murmur rippled through the squad. No one had said it out loud, but they were all thinking the same thing. What if this crystal wasn't just a weapon? What if it was a trap? "How do you want to investigate this thing?" Cole asked. He didn't wait for an answer, though. He was already walking over to one of the nearby consoles. "You're right about one thing, Captain. We don't know what we're dealing with. But if this thing is as powerful as it looks, maybe we can use it to fight back." David nodded, acknowledging the truth in Cole's words. They needed to understand the crystal. If it was indeed a key to defeating the aliens, they had to unlock its secrets before it was too late. The squad spread out, scanning the room for anything that might shed light on the crystal's origins. The console Cole had approached flickered to life, powered by some internal system. As the display came to life, the familiar interface of the facility's research data appeared. David stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat as he recognized the words on the screen. The data was fragmented, incomplete, but one thing stood out, a string of symbols, encoded and scrambled, with one word appearing repeatedly: anomaly. "Anomaly?" David murmured, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of the data. "What does that mean?" Torres stepped over to join him, leaning in to examine the screen. "It's referring to something. A cosmic anomaly, maybe. Something that shouldn't exist." David's heart raced. The mention of a cosmic anomaly brought a rush of memories, of rumors, whispers about extraterrestrial phenomena beyond human comprehension. There had been reports of cosmic events that defied physics, of strange objects appearing in distant corners of the universe. But this was different. This was real. A sudden thought struck him. The anomaly. It's not just a weapon, is it? It's a source of power. Something that affects the fabric of the universe itself. Cole, who had been examining the data from a different console, turned sharply. "Wait a minute. This isn't just a weapon. Are you telling me this thing is some kind of energy conduit? Like it's drawing power from something outside our galaxy?" David nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I'm saying. It's not just a power source. It's a force, a living energy that's tied to the very fabric of space and time. That's why the aliens are after it. They want it." A tense silence followed as the squad processed the implications of what David had just said. If they were right, the crystal wasn't just a weapon. It was something far more dangerous, something capable of shifting the balance of power in the universe itself. "So, what now?" Cole asked, his voice quiet but determined. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to come back. We move," David said, his voice hardening. "We use the crystal, we find out more, and we find a way to turn it against them. But we don't take any chances. We stick together." The squad nodded, gearing up once more. There was no time to waste. The crystal was their only advantage, and they couldn't afford to lose it. With the crystal secured in a protective case, the team moved cautiously through the abandoned facility, using their weapons and their training to stay alert for any signs of movement. The deep hum of the crystal continued to reverberate through the air, almost like a heartbeat, guiding their every step. They reached a large chamber, one that seemed to have been used for research. The walls were lined with strange alien markings, symbols that David didn't understand but which seemed to glow faintly in the low light. Some of them matched the symbols he had seen in the facility's databanks. "Something tells me we're close," David muttered, his voice tense. They entered the chamber slowly, their eyes scanning the room. The walls were covered in alien technology, devices that pulsed with the same eerie light as the crystal. At the center of the room stood a massive, circular structure, a device, perhaps, or some kind of portal. The structure seemed to hum in response to the crystal, its energy matching the rhythm of the glowing artifact. "That's it," Cole whispered, his voice tinged with awe. "This is the source. This is what the aliens were after." David stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching for the crystal. As soon as it was within range of the device, the air around them crackled, the energy in the room building to a deafening crescendo. The crystal reacted, glowing brighter and brighter until it pulsed with such intensity that the entire room seemed to vibrate with its power. David's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing: the aliens would be back. And they wouldn't be pleased. "Get ready," David ordered, his voice hard and commanding. "We're about to find out exactly what this thing can do." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them trembled again, but this time, it wasn't just the structure reacting to the crystal's power, it was the entire facility. The walls groaned, and the ceiling above them cracked, large chunks of debris falling to the ground with a loud, echoing crash. The air was thick with the sound of machinery coming to life, and David could feel the temperature rising as the energy in the room surged. "Captain!" Torres called, her voice sharp with alarm. "We've got incoming." David's eyes snapped to the door at the far end of the chamber. The aliens were here, and they weren't going to wait for them to finish playing with their new toy. The squad quickly took up defensive positions, weapons raised, but it was clear they were outmatched. The alien soldiers had the advantage of technology far beyond anything they had. But the crystal, it was their wild card. Their one chance to turn the tide. Suddenly, the ground shook with such force that David was knocked off balance. The ceiling above them cracked, sending debris crashing to the floor. The sound of alien screeches echoed from the hallway outside, growing louder and more frantic as the aliens closed in. David's heart raced as he stared at the crystal, now pulsing erratically in his hands. Something inside him urged him to activate it, to tap into its power and use it to fight back. The energy was building, almost out of control. "Do it!" Cole shouted, his voice fierce with determination. "We don't have a choice." With a final, desperate push, David slammed the crystal into the device in the center of the room. The impact sent a shockwave through the facility, and for a moment, everything went white. The explosion of light that followed was unlike anything David had ever seen. The crystal's energy surged outward, tearing through the walls, shattering everything in its path. The alien soldiers, caught in the blast, were sent flying backward, their bodies convulsing as the energy from the crystal overwhelmed them. David shielded his eyes, heart hammering in his chest. For a moment, there was nothing but blinding light and the deafening roar of power. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything fell silent. When David finally opened his eyes, the room was a wreck, shattered walls, broken equipment, and debris scattered across the floor. The alien soldiers were gone. Their bodies lay scattered across the room, but it was clear they had been utterly defeated. The crystal was still glowing, but its light had faded to a soft pulse, as if exhausted by the immense energy it had unleashed. David stood there, breathing heavily, his mind racing. They had done it. For now. But the cost? What had they just unleashed? The battle had been won, but the cost was still unclear. The alien soldiers that had stormed the research facility had been obliterated by the crystal's overwhelming energy, their bodies now nothing more than smoldering remains scattered across the room. The crystal's power had left the entire structure trembling, the air thick with the strange hum of energy that refused to subside. But David Carter knew that their victory was temporary, at best. The squad was battered, shaken by the force of the explosion. They had narrowly escaped destruction, but something felt different now. The very air around them seemed charged with the unnatural power of the crystal. David could feel it. It pulsed through his veins like an electric current, and with every heartbeat, he became more aware of the change it had wrought, not just in the environment, but in him. In all of them. "Is everyone all right?" David asked. His voice hoarse, though it was still filled with command. He looked around at his squad, waiting for them to regain their footing. Sergeant Cole was the first to respond, brushing dust and debris from his uniform. He looked pale, his face drawn with fatigue, but his eyes were sharp, alert as ever. "We're good, Captain." "Just rattled." "What the hell was that?" David didn't immediately answer. His gaze flickered toward the still glowing crystal, now lying dormant on the floor. He wasn't sure what to make of it. The energy that had surged through them all had been intense, overwhelming. His thoughts were disjointed, fragmented, but one thing was clear: they were no longer dealing with a simple alien invasion. The crystal had changed everything. Torres stepped up beside David, her expression one of disbelief. "I don't know about the rest of you, but that thing," she nodded toward the crystal, "it did something to me. It felt like it was inside my head." Like it was, she stopped herself, shaking her head. "I can't explain it." David's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what she meant. The moment he had touched the crystal, he had felt a connection, something deeper than just the raw power it emanated. It was as though the crystal had seen him. Felt him. The energy had flowed through his very being, and for a brief, terrifying moment, he had wondered if it would consume him entirely. And now, it seemed that whatever that energy had triggered in him was only the beginning. "We all felt it," David muttered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not sure what it was, but I think we've crossed a line. A line that can't be uncrossed." He turned his attention back to the rest of the squad. "We need to keep moving. The aliens are not gone, they've just retreated for now. And they'll be back." As if on cue, the rumble of the facility's damaged structure intensified, and the walls trembled again. The ground beneath their feet shook violently, sending the squad stumbling, scrambling for balance. The temperature dropped suddenly, the atmosphere growing thick and charged with static electricity. David's instincts screamed. This wasn't normal. "Everyone, get to cover," David ordered. "Move now." They scrambled to a nearby alcove, ducking behind the remaining debris. The walls groaned, and a sudden explosion of light filled the room. David's head snapped back toward the center of the chamber, where the crystal had started to glow once again. But this time, its light was different, brighter, sharper, and unnaturally intense. Then, through the light, a voice echoed. Low. Deep. Malevolent. "You do not understand what you've unleashed." David's heart skipped a beat as the voice filled his mind. It was like a whisper at first, barely perceptible, but then it grew louder, more insistent. The voice was not coming from the crystal, it was coming from within him. "You cannot control it." The words felt like a physical presence in his skull, pressing against the walls of his mind. David's hands shook as he grabbed his helmet, desperately trying to block out the intrusive voice. "What the hell is this?" Cole shouted, his voice cutting through the terror that had settled in the room. "What's happening, Captain?" David didn't answer immediately. His head was spinning. His mind was reeling. He could still hear the voice inside his head. It was growing stronger. "You will become one with it. All of you will." The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a command. A decree. David's fingers tightened around his rifle. "Hold on," he said through gritted teeth. "Stay focused." The squad was in chaos, each of them visibly shaken by the voice that seemed to invade their thoughts. Torres was clutching her helmet, her breathing shallow and frantic. I can't think. It's in my head, Captain. It's everywhere." David's eyes darted to the crystal, which was now radiating with unnatural energy. It was as though the crystal was alive, and it had begun to assert control over them. But the question remained, was this something the crystal was doing to them, or was it simply an inevitable consequence of wielding such power? "Stay together," David barked, forcing himself to push through the mental fog. "We're not letting this thing break us apart." The squad managed to pull themselves together, each one fighting the overwhelming force that seemed to be closing in on their minds. They pressed forward, moving cautiously toward the exit of the facility, but it was clear that the ground was shifting beneath them. The walls groaned as if the building itself was alive, reacting to the energy of the crystal. David's mind was still reeling from the voice, the powerful sense of otherness that had filled him. But there was something else, too. A part of him, the part that had always been in control, the part that had led them through every mission, was beginning to fade. It was being overtaken by the something else that the crystal had awakened within him. The energy was too strong, and it was beginning to erode his will, his sense of self. "We need to destroy it," Cole said, his voice tight with urgency. "Whatever this thing is, it's too dangerous." David snapped his head toward Cole, his vision swimming. "Destroy it?" His voice was rough, filled with disbelief. "Do you really think that's the answer?" "You've seen what it can do," Cole shot back, his hand tight around his rifle. "What it's already done to us. We can't keep playing with fire, Captain." David's thoughts raced, but the voice was growing louder, drowning out his logic. "You will succumb. You will all become like me." The words echoed in his mind, pressing against him, pushing him toward something he didn't want to understand. His hands shook, his vision blurred, and for a terrifying moment, David wasn't sure who he was anymore. The crystal's power had already begun to unravel the fabric of his being, and he couldn't stop it. He reached for the crystal. But before he could touch it, Torres grabbed his arm. "Captain," she cried, her voice filled with fear. "We need to make a choice. Now." David's gaze met hers, his heart heavy. The team's survival depended on a decision that had to be made immediately. The crystal's power had already begun to fracture their unity, and there was no telling how far the alien force controlling the crystal could reach. David exhaled sharply, pushing aside the fear and doubt that threatened to engulf him. "We keep moving," he said firmly. "We use this power. We break the chains before they break us." The squad looked at him with a mix of apprehension and resolve. They were deep in enemy territory now, caught between the aliens who sought to destroy them and the power they had unearthed. There was no turning back. They moved toward the exit, the crystal's hum guiding them forward. As they left the facility, the voice still echoed in their minds, but it was faint. They had made their choice. They were going to use the crystal, control it, and fight back. But as they emerged into the alien world, David knew one thing for certain: the real war had just begun. David Carter stood at the edge of the alien facility, the faint hum of the crystal still echoing in his ears. The power it held was undeniable, and its influence on his team was becoming more apparent with each passing minute. His squad was exhausted, physically and mentally, but they were ready for the final stand. Or so he hoped. The sky above them was a swirling mass of dark clouds, heavy with the ominous energy that seemed to radiate from the crystal. Its blue glow had faded slightly, but it still pulsated, almost like a heartbeat. The faint vibrations underfoot were a constant reminder of the force that was now bound to them, an unnatural energy that they didn't fully understand but had no choice but to wield. He turned to face his squad, his comrades, who had fought alongside him through countless battles. Yet, this one was different. This one wasn't just about survival. It was about choice. And the choice, as it always is, was going to be theirs. "We're running out of time," David said, his voice cutting through the quiet. The tension in the air was palpable. The aliens, those strange, otherworldly soldiers, had been pursuing them for days, relentless and merciless. They had no choice but to keep moving, to use every ounce of the crystal's power to keep them at bay. But every time they used it, every time the crystal discharged its energy, the strain on their bodies and minds grew more intense. Sergeant Cole stepped forward, his face grim. "We've been running for days. Every time we fight them off, every time we use this damn thing, it feels like something's slipping away. We're not ourselves anymore, Captain." David didn't need Cole to spell it out. He could feel it too, the slow, creeping change that had taken root inside them. The crystal's influence wasn't just physical. It was emotional. Psychological. It gnawed at the edges of their minds, eroding their resolve, pushing them further toward something darker. Torres, always sharp and composed, now looked as though she were barely holding herself together. "If we keep using it, we might not come back. It's starting to feel like we're not fighting for survival anymore. It's like we're fighting to be ourselves." David clenched his fists, his gaze shifting to the crystal that rested in his hands. What had once seemed like a tool, a weapon, now felt like a ticking time bomb. Every use of it brought them closer to a precipice, a point of no return. "I know," David said, his voice heavy. "But we can't stop now. Not when we're this close." "What are we close to?" Cole snapped. "We're being hunted. We're on the verge of losing everything. And you're still clinging to this thing like it's some kind of savior. We don't know what it's doing to us." David's gaze softened. "I don't know what it is either, Cole. But what I do know is this: we're the last line of defense. If we don't stand and fight, humanity loses. This isn't just about us anymore." A silence hung in the air. The gravity of David's words seemed to settle over them all, like a weight that none of them could escape. There was truth in what he said, but the cost of that truth was becoming increasingly clear. The power of the crystal, whatever it was, had begun to seep into them, change them. They were no longer the same soldiers who had dropped onto this alien planet. And with each passing day, they were less certain of who they had become. David exhaled, finally breaking the silence. "Look, I'm not asking anyone to keep fighting if they don't believe in it anymore. But if any of you want to walk away, I won't stop you." The squad exchanged looks, their eyes filled with uncertainty, hesitation, but also determination. The bond between them was undeniable. They had fought through countless battles together, and even now, when everything was falling apart, that bond still held strong. "We're with you, Captain," Cole said quietly, his voice less harsh than before. "But we need a plan. We need to understand what we're dealing with. This can't just be about surviving anymore." David nodded. He knew that the time for mere survival had passed. What they faced now was something far greater than anything they had ever imagined. The aliens, the crystal, the war, they were all tied together in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. But the answers were within their reach. All they had to do was make the right choice. "We find out what this crystal really is," David said, his voice resolute. "And we use it to end this war. For good. The truth behind the crystal." The squad moved cautiously through the alien landscape, their path illuminated only by the faint glow of the crystal and the eerie light of the planet's twin moons. The air was thick with tension, every footstep laden with the weight of the choices that had brought them here. They had come a long way, but the final confrontation, against the alien force that had been hunting them, against the very power they had unleashed, was imminent. David couldn't help but feel the pull of the crystal, the constant hum that vibrated through his body, urging him forward. But with every step, he also felt the gnawing sense that they were heading towards something they couldn't control. The further they traveled, the clearer it became. The crystal wasn't just a tool, it was part of something much larger, something that spanned galaxies, that stretched beyond human comprehension. "I've been thinking," Torres said, her voice soft but filled with an intensity that matched David's own. "What if the crystal isn't just some weapon? What if it's a key? A key to something bigger than the war between the aliens and us?" David glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if this thing was never meant for us?" Torres continued. "What if the aliens have been using it for centuries, maybe millennia, to manipulate energy, control civilizations, and now we've found it by accident?" David stopped dead in his tracks, his heart pounding. "A key to what?" Torres shook her head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, I think it's more than just an alien weapon. It's part of something bigger. Something ancient." The words hung in the air, thick with implication. Could it be true? Had they stumbled into a war that wasn't just about survival? Was the crystal not just a weapon of war, but a force that had the power to shape the very fabric of the universe itself? Before David could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. The unmistakable hum of alien technology filled the air, followed by the harsh, guttural growls of the alien soldiers they had been evading. David turned to face his squad, his voice unwavering. "It's now or never. We can't keep running. We face them, and we end this." The final confrontation. The alien forces surged toward them, faster than David could have predicted. Their sleek, insectoid bodies were cloaked in dark armor, their weapons glowing with the same eerie energy that had surged through the crystal. The squad opened fire, their weapons spitting rounds of energy, but the aliens were relentless. David raised his rifle, his hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the immense pressure of the moment. The crystal pulsed again, its energy seemingly responding to the chaos. The soldiers fought valiantly, each of them moving with precision, their experience in combat evident. But it was clear that their weapons were ineffective against the sheer force of the alien technology. "We need to use the crystal," David shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Now!" Torres rushed forward, the crystal in hand, and placed it into the center of the battle. The moment it touched the ground, the crystal exploded with energy, a shockwave that knocked everyone off their feet. The blast sent the aliens flying backward, their bodies convulsing as the energy surged through them. But the crystal was not finished. It continued to pulse, each beat sending out waves of destructive energy that ripped through the alien forces like a tide. David's squad watched in stunned silence as the aliens fell, their forms disintegrating under the power of the crystal's force. But with each passing moment, David could feel the weight of the crystal's power growing heavier. It was no longer just a tool, they were becoming part of it. And the more they used it, the less they could control it. "Is it over?" Cole asked, his voice quiet. David didn't respond immediately. His hands trembled as he held the rifle, the air around them still vibrating with the energy. "Not yet," he said softly. "We've won this battle, but the real war isn't over. We need to figure out how to stop this before it destroys everything." But deep down, David knew one thing: the choice they had made had changed everything. And now, there was no going back. The lesson. As the final echoes of battle faded, David stood alone in the silent wreckage, his mind racing. The crystal's power had saved them, but at what cost? What had they become in the process? Were they still human, or were they something else entirely? David gazed up at the twin moons, their pale light casting long shadows across the alien landscape. The crystal had given them the power to survive, to fight back, but it had also revealed something deeper, something that humanity had always feared. The true cost of power wasn't in the victory, but in the choices it forced upon you. The lesson wasn't just about survival. It was about what you were willing to sacrifice to protect what you loved. And David knew that, in the end, the greatest battle was the one fought within. And as he turned to face his squad, he understood something else, that the real fight for humanity had just begun.